Hello and welcome to season 2, episode 1 of Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series. My name is Logan Wolf. My wife and I are church planters in Provo, Utah. We're coming up on 12 years now. And during that time, our ministry has taken all kinds of turns. We have been a mobile church. We have navigated a church merger. We have been multi-site. We have shrugged off that structure and moved into a network of house churches. In fact, we've been doing that now for the last several years. And my purpose or my goal in this podcast is to kind of walk back through all of that and to basically point out what I would do differently if I were pursuing the same methodology, the same course of action, as well as what I would do differently if I was just starting from scratch, knowing what I know now with these 12 years behind me. And my hope is in doing this and talking back through this, I can save you some of the frustration and the heartache and the missteps, as well as just the time and energy and money as you are preparing to labor or are laboring in your city. And season 1, I had a couple of guests join me. The last episode, the season finale of season 1, was my wife, Grayson. If you have not heard that episode, I encourage you right now, stop this one, go back, listen to season 1, episode 8 with my wife. A great conversation just as we're recapping all of the previous episodes together. And I was also joined by my friend Isaac Morin in Orange County, California, and he is going to help me kick off this next season right now. And I love having Isaac on because Isaac and my stories are very parallel, both in the duration of time we've been in our respective fields, but then even just some of the transitions and the things that we've been through. So Isaac, hello, sir.
What's going on, man? Happy to be back.
It is good to see you. I know it's been since the last episode dropped, I don't know whatever word you're supposed to use, till recording this. It's been about a month hiatus we took between these two seasons. So maybe even before we introduce our topic or get into the conversation today, anything just personal ministry wise the last month, because usually we're sharing some stories just what's going on. Anything going on in the last month you just want to update us on real quick?
Yeah, sure. I hiked a 10,000 foot mountain in the snow, and then I had surgery on a hernia the following week. Both of those are completely unrelated.
Yeah, there you go.
Today I am celebrating 20 years of marriage with you.
There with me. So that is there is just a diversity of things going on in your life right now. That's man, that's awesome. Well, it's been a busy few weeks. We too have been busy. My wife and I's anniversary is coming up as well. We've not been married as long as you. We're going to celebrate 15 years, but we have just had a number of baptisms in the last month. Nice. Since we last talked. So it's been incredible just across our network. So
that's great.
Yes, sir.
We're getting ready for May. We've kind of been in the works in the process, so this does fit in the question. We're getting the Southern California network of home churches, house churches together in about a week. And so we've been pulling stories together, just all sorts of stuff in an attempt to not just celebrate what God's been doing in the past couple years, really, but really in the last few months. I mean, there's something like 43 churches have been started
right on, man.
In the Southern California area. Some of those are out into the nations as well. And then we're sending off, Troy is heading over to,
I heard, yeah.
Location. Yeah. So we've been working together, some of the network leaders here, getting ready for that night. So that's been just some of the conversations with some of the stories and what God's been doing is really, really cool. So,
and this has nothing to do with our topic today, but no matter your methodology when it comes to ministry or church planning, there is tremendous value in being connected with other missionaries, church planners, pastors, for the sake of hearing the stories and being reminded that you're part of something bigger than just your body, right? Your flock. And so we actually, in January, we pulled a bunch of our leaders together And basically it was just kind of a brainstorming session, but what came out of that was the need to do just what you said, on a more
Yeah.
regular basis, pull us all of us together for prayer and celebration. So
Yes.
I just drove up to Ogden, about an hour and 15 minutes north of where I live here in Provo. And we just pulled together a bunch of our leaders for dinner, and we took an hour and celebrated stories. And then we took an hour and prayed, and it was just a powerful time. So I tremendous value. In fact, that may be a good takeaway. Just if nothing else in this episode resonates with you, make sure you're connected with people and celebrating and praying together and pursuing the expansion of the kingdom. So good stuff, bro.
Love it. And I
Love
think
it.
it fits. I think one of the things that as we kind of we have a little bit of a bi-weekly rhythm over here, with it's like a blend of conversation and catch up with a little bit of like an iron on iron, type environment. And usually the resounding bell that tolls, so to speak, is I feel alone, and I feel like I'm just kind of working my own lane. And I think that's why what we're going to talk about today is so important.
Yeah. Well, then let me go ahead, and that was a great segue, sir. Let me go ahead and introduce our topic. We're going to deal with the mistake that this episode and the next several episodes, we'll deal with that season of life and ministry between arriving in your city. So for me, that was moving to Utah, moving to Provo, and your launch, your start of your church. And that may be a variable as far as how much time that was. For us, it was a matter of months. Isaac, how long was it for you? We moved here in May. We launched in September. What?
Yeah, got here in late December. Launch service was in March.
Okay.
So,
Even shorter than us. Okay. We will talk about that also.
We should talk about that.
We will talk about that. The amount of time between arriving and kicking things off. I would do that all over again.
I'm already angry.
I'm already angry. I robbed my family. Okay. So, but what we're going to talk about today is again, it's like with the conversation we had about church planning books, maybe even with the fundraising conversation. It dealt with that season before moving to the field. There's probably some of that bleeding over into once you arrive. This topic's the same way. It's something you could have dealt with before arriving, but it's certainly something you should have had in place. I wish I'd had in place once we moved. And so that's this. This mistake is I did not have a church planting mentor or coach. I did not have a church planting mentor or coach. And so Isaac and I were brainstorming a little bit before we hit record. And I think one of the things would be beneficial just before we pick up this conversation is just some definitions. And so let me just kind of present a spectrum to you, and then our conversation will kind of fall in the middle of it. So at the one end of the spectrum, you kind of have like a cohort or a peer-to-peer kind of coaching group or something of that. And that would be a group, yourself, and then maybe some brothers or sisters that are a few steps ahead of you, some that are a couple steps behind you, and you're kind of all just learning together around whatever topic, whatever phase of ministry. You're just kind of learning together. And so there's a space for sharing, mistakes, sharing questions, going to the word together, bouncing ideas off each other, kind of brainstorm. That's at the one end. And that's, don't let me knock that. That is a tremendously valuable thing. I almost always have some sort of peer-to-peer group going here in Utah. In fact, we've got one that's going to wrap up in just a couple of weeks. It'll wrap up in May. I've pulled 5 or 6 of us together, and we're discussing church multiplication. And so it's peers, it's people that's been trying to multiply existing churches in our network, and we're problem solving some things together. We're learning together. Now, if you go maybe a step into that spectrum, I would say you have something like a mentor or a coach. And I don't want to use those interchangeably. I want to draw a couple of distinctions. When I talk about a mentor, I'm talking about probably more of a relational connection there. But it's also someone just sharing from their experience and helping you navigate some problem, some issue, some phase of life or ministry. And they're just, here's what I've done. and they're giving you advice based on that personal experience, and you can take it or leave it or whatever, but you're just trying to glean someone who's gone ahead of you, and you're trying to glean some wisdom and some knowledge from that experience. A coach, I would differentiate, and that they're not so much giving you advice. Maybe they're coming with some expertise, with some knowledge, with some experience, but they're kind of learning your circumstances and situation and helping you navigate that by drawing some things out. Maybe a good coach helps you be the best version of yourself. And so you can get coaches in all different kinds of topics, but this would be someone probably helping you tackle some specific phase of ministry or life, some specific challenge or obstacle or stuckage, and they're navigating you through that. And that may be formal in the sense that you're paying for it. That may be informal in the sense that it's just someone you're connected to. I'm doing a lot of informal coaching with the guys in our network here. I've received some informal coaching, and I have received some formal coaching where I've paid someone for some input and helped draw some stuff out. And then at the other end of the spectrum, which we're not going to get into today, would be probably something like consulting. And that would be someone who, again, comes with expertise and experience and knowledge, and you're paying them. But you're paying them because you want them to tell you what to do, right? You're wanting them to bring solutions to your obstacles, to your problems, to the barriers that you see in your again, life or ministry or whatever it is. So for our purposes today, we may get into some of those other topics down the road, but we're going to kind of focus in on the mentor, coach kind of aspect. Isaac, do you want to maybe just by way of starting, when you just talked to moving, you didn't do this either. So you rolled in, maybe just kind of give us a rundown of why you view this as a mistake. And then we'll kind of talk through what would be maybe some of the benefits and kind of hash that out a little bit. But why would it be problematic for someone to roll in without those things?
Well, I think that, there's so many, I guess, it's like, tell me all the things that I regret doing, or show me all the things I regret doing in that initial year. And I could probably correlate that back to something that someone could have said, hey, why don't you think about this? Or, hey, why don't you consider this? And whether that's a mentor relationship or a coach, that's just walking through a launch, right? Because there's so many different little objectives you're walking through as you get to that launch date, and then beyond that launch date. Like in the first year, there's just so many, what are they called? Like benchmarks, that you're kind of hitting. And so putting aside the whole, we only had 3 months to get ready for our grand opening service, which included trying to canvass our entire city before then as well. Yeah, there's just tons of stuff that I'm sure we missed. It's like I haven't really gone back through that hey, we're here and here's all the things I wish I would have done differently. But I was counseled at the place I was working prior to moving down that you really should only be talking to one individual. So the idea was, at least this is the way I was told to approach it, was the person that you're getting advice from won't necessarily take you seriously if they know you're talking to a lot of different people. And I understand that, right? At a level, from the standpoint of, we don't want to be shopping around a bunch of advice and then and like cherry picking advice, right? Because I'm sure there's people that do that. Like they want to get advice from 4 different people, but they're only going to listen if people agree with what they want to do anyway. Well, that's wrong. But
yeah, let me interrupt you. Yeah, I don't see that's interesting. I don't think getting advice from multiple people is the problem. I think the problem is looking for people to affirm your decisions. And again, when we're talking about mentors and coaches, we're looking for people you're giving permission to, to confront what your path and your thoughts and your opinions, and say, do you really think that's the best? Have you considered this? What about this? Why would you say that? Or why would you do that? And really
Yes.
make you think through those things. And I think that's the hallmark of a good mentor and or a good coach, is someone who's going to challenge
Yes.
your opinions and ideas and not just affirm them. That's almost if your mentor or coach agrees with everything you're doing, they're probably not a good mentor or coach, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm kind of getting to the point. So, right. So what that led me to do then was to seek counsel from our sending church, right? Like the senior guy there. But so it did two things. One, it it made me only seek counsel from this individual, which is a very wise individual. Like I have nothing but anything that I learned from him is still valuable to me today. Like it was all great advice when I got advice. But the nature of that counsel or coaching was not structured, and it was not at any regular interval, which I think with good coaching, good mentorship, both of those need to be established. We need to know what exactly we're talking about, and we need to have some checkpoints along the way, some follow-up along the way. And we had none of that.
Yeah.
So it was basically every time I ran into a crisis, it was like, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, what would you do? But it was always in the aftermath. So there really wasn't a lot of forward looking, a lot of forward thinking. And my leadership was made to be very reactionary out the gate. So that was, if I had to say, hey, what was the worst detriment to the church plant as a result of not having this, or at least structuring it the way we had it structured, I would say that was the worst.
Yeah.
And this isn't that guy's fault. This is the fault of not having this in place from boots on the ground,
Right.
to the launch, and really that first year, because everything at a level in terms of like real church planting problems or real issues that we were facing that were actually, putting up substantial barriers to the growth of the church, to things that would really help the church establish and do well out the gate. They were, everything was reactionary, right? There was not a lot of proactivity happening. Now, there was a lot of planning happening. There was a lot of budgeting happening. There was a lot of administration happening. But in terms of like leadership, proactive decisions and things getting put in place, none of that was happening. So I think that in and of itself was enough for me to look back and be like, holy smokes, that was just horrible, horrible, horrible for the church plant. And really the worst it was for me, because I'm the guy, right?
Right.
And not that not all the decisions were reactionary, but man, I'll tell you, there was just some conversations that I had with him that were like, and I wouldn't have thought this way then, like, man, we really should have been able to avoid this. But looking back 12 years, I'm like, yeah, there is really no reason why we should have really been having that conversation. And again, this goes back to a little bit of like, the counsel I had originally got about mentorship and about who I talked to was really wrong.
Yeah.
And then I think on the other side of it, it was kind of like this whole approach to mentorship that I did have just led to reactionary leadership. So
I appreciate you sharing that, bro. Yeah, looking in our situation, again, hindsight, just like you, in the moment, this was far from my mind. It's like, and there were like, we had our sending agency and they were telling us things. And so, there were voices. But now hindsight, you look back, you're like, man, some of that mess we went through and some of those decisions we made, it would have been so helpful to have a regular, time with either a mentor who's sharing their experience or a coach who's leading us through this process. And we just didn't. So, even for us, I wish we had just had a church planting mentor, someone who had done it and was just sharing advice and stories and anecdotes from them and helping us think through our own experience.
Yeah.
Again, I grew up in a church plant, and I shared that story in season 1, where I feel like that would have been a great opportunity for us and our home church to kind of continue to flesh out relationship. And that didn't happen. And that's, I think, a detrimental loss. The pastor just kind of cutting us off once we got here. And then but even that, I mean, that's outside of our context. It would have been tremendous that even now that I'm talking, it would have been tremendous to have a church planting mentor from Utah. I mean, there's not a lot of churches in Utah, and there was even less 12 years ago.
Yeah.
But there were people who had done it, and it would have been great just to connect with them. And I didn't. And that's a failed, again, I could have reached out to people. And essentially, when you're looking for a mentor, you need to kind of make that first move. I know there may be some people who come alongside you and say, hey, I would be happy to walk with you for a season. But I think more often than not, even what I'm seeing in this most recent season, it's like, you do got to take that initiative and ask someone, like, can I, yoke up with you for a little bit and learn from you as I'm walking through this. So I wish I'd had that. And then just as we got underway, a coach would have been so helpful, someone to bounce questions off and think proactively, like you said, the future. I'm thinking when we navigated the church merger, I would have loved someone to help us walk through that.
Yeah.
I was doing by the seat of my pants. I've no clue what I'm doing. I read like 1 or 2 books, which we'll talk about that in a future episode, and just jumped into it. And then of course we're multi-site. So, I mean, I was out here under 2 different sending agencies, a local church missions agency and a denominational sending agency. None of them, like, the whole multi-site church was a completely foreign concept. So none of them really could speak into that. And then when we shifted into house churches, it was even a greater disconnect, right? And so I think some kind of coach in those transitions would have been really helpful, even for us, and maybe kind of trying to preserve some of relationships with supporters in the body here and those sending agent, someone who could just help us navigate it. And I think, to what your point, a good coach, a good mentor would look to those things and kind of help you anticipate and draw those things out and ask the questions and get you thinking, instead of this reactionary, well, that was a bad mistake, now what do we do? That was a terrible decision, now what do we do? So
yeah. And I think too, and I'll be careful here, because, like, again, anything I ever received from that time was always great. I mean, and I refer back to a lot of it even still. And there were probably some things that he threw up as like some radars and some red flags, and or some thoughts about the future and setting some things up. But I think just because we never really entered into that process with that idea. So from a helpful perspective, I think for those listening, I would say getting ready to, I mean, and this could obviously start well into the early fundraising stages and coalescing a team stuff that we talked about earlier. But as you really get to move on the ground, having some sort of conversation about the nature of the relationship, for one, if we're mentoring or for coaching, and the same guy could do both. I'll talk about another piece of this in a second, but so certainly a guy can coach and can mentor.
Yeah.
And it would be helpful to talk about clarifying that and looking ahead together at what's coming up, and having a conversation about what he feels he could mentor you through versus what he could coach you through.
Yeah.
And then also just establishing some checkpoints and a communication interval. Because checkpoints can be quarterly, they can be every other month, they could be monthly.
But when you say checkpoint, what are you talking about? Define that for everybody.
I think checkpoint, what we would be talking about is almost a little bit of like a goal setting language, where we're going to put together a plan, we're going to work it for 12 weeks, and the checkpoint is, how did that go? Like, the checkpoint is 12 weeks, right? So we're rolling into, again, let's just say you're on the ground 12 months before your launch, right? And you've got a strategy of just meeting people in the community for the first 3 months you're there. So the assessment is, how many people have you met? And let's rank them from red, yellow, green. right? And that's your checkpoint. 12 weeks is the checkpoint. And there's a lot of different checkpoints we could talk about: financial checkpoints, relationship building checkpoints, meeting space checkpoints, purchases checkpoints,
Let
leadership
me
team
let me
checkpoints.
insert something here before you continue, because this may be something to keep in mind when we're looking for, if you're trying to find a mentor or a coach. It may just be for a specific season of life or ministry, or for a
Yeah.
specific obstacle or problem, or stuckage that you're trying to address. And
Yep.
not like, I don't think that's good. I don't think you should come out at thinking this person's going to mentor me forever. And so
Yep.
once a week for the rest of my life, I'm going to talk to this person, or this
Yes.
person's going to coach me. And so once a quarter, I've got to block out 3 hours because I'm going to talk to this person for the rest of my life.
And-
There's this, like, again, it's like, yeah, a fundraising coach. We talked about fundraising in the previous season. A fundraising coach would have been beneficial
Yeah.
at the outset, right? But then I probably wouldn't go to the fundraising coach to talk to me about preparing for a grand opening church service,
Yeah.
right? Or a fundraising coach to talk to me about discipleship,
Yes.
or the discipleship person, maybe even to talk about preaching. And so there is this, in fact, let me show you this picture, and then I want to have you
Yes.
pick up where you just left off. So this, and pictures make for great audio. And so this is so if you're
listening on your commute,
so if you're listening to this picture is the best. This is incredible. If you're watching on YouTube, I want to show it to you here. I'll describe it. So this comes to us. I shared previously, Isaac and I met at Idea Day, which is a brainstorming conference, a collaboration type conference out of Southern Hills Baptist Church in Las Vegas, Nevada. I highly recommend it. I'm grateful for Idea Day. I love Pastor Josh Tice. He did this session called Developing a Team of Mentors and Coaches. And so he gave us this picture. Where's the camera? There it is. It's basically a conference table. And then around the conference table are a bunch of chairs. And one of the chairs is yourself. And then let me just give you some examples. One of the chairs, he has a spiritual mentor, and then a ministry mentor, then a preaching coach, and a theology coach, or a life coach, or your financial planner, or your family expert, your accountability partner, your wife or husband, your spouse, whatever. And again, it just kind of goes around the table. And so it's the idea of, I don't need to go to the one person for everything I'm going to face in life and ministry. And even this phase of ministry between moving to your field and launching, there may be some specific help and specific input you need that you won't need a year later. And so that person, to your point, I think, Isaac, and you can pick up here, may or may not be the person who continues with you in that kind of formal relationship down the road. So go ahead and pick up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. We were talking before the show, it's like multitude counselors, their safety, right? And, if you find a guy that is willing to help you with all of those things, I would be really concerned about that guy. Because he probably has a high opinion of himself.
Yeah, he knows everything. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if we had talked about something along these lines in one of the earlier conversations, where I guess just having this kind of open-handed communication with the sender or these people that are in your ministry at any given time, where, let's say you're 12 months out from your launch and you're having the conversation about communication intervals, checkpoints, what he feels he can coach versus what he can mentor, and just acknowledging that together, that, hey, if you think you can mentor or coach me through the first 18 months of this church plant, depending on how that goes, awesome. But by the way, it would only do us the best service possible if you're just very honest about your own limitations. Again, don't try to be the guy that can do all things and become all things to all men. It's just not possible. Together, that relationship needs to be of such that we're fine to come and go as we're needed. There's no ego here.
Yeah.
And when I can coach you on something, I want to do that. But when I just have to mentor you on something, not that coaching is a higher value than mentoring, but just, there are nuances to that, as we established in the forefront. So So I think that's a good way to approach it, but have that plan in place, because
Well,
that was not at all how we were structured out the gate. And yeah, there were some pains from the leadership standpoint about the way that I thought about the church that probably could have been eliminated had we had that. Hey, what can you and what can't you?
yeah.
And when are we talking and when are we assessing what we talked about? So
Yeah, and I think that the episode you were kind of referencing, the phrase was all, the majority of relationship conflict comes out of us
yes,
uncommunicated expectations.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
we just assume. So again, the assumption on my part was the pastor of my home church, who was a church planter, would speak into this, and he did.
Yeah.
Well, then my sending agency would be. Well, then he didn't. And then again, you don't want someone to come in and you assuming. I think this is maybe even more specific to your point. You assume, well, this person is going to address this issue over this much time, and we're going to meet this many times, and they're thinking you're just coming to them for advice, and that's
Yeah.
totally. You can ask advice, of everybody you can. That's not it, but to think now this person and I are going to have a standing meeting, and they're going to, I think so. Again, in all these relationships, and I think that's been a recurring theme of a mistake, is
Yeah.
we just run in assuming one thing, someone else is assuming another, and we're not clarifying what's happening here.
Yeah.
And so I think in a mentor role, a coaching role, or this is not indefinitely, it's, hey, for the next, like you said, season, 18 months, year, would you be willing to meet with me X amount of times to help me think through this, walk through this?
Yeah.
Or I'm dealing with this problem. Could we, could you, work with me until this problem's resolved, 6 months or whatever it is, and then we can reevaluate. But
Yeah.
I think the clarity is huge.
Yeah.
In having meaningful, coaching, mentoring relation, even the peer-to-peer stuff. Like I just mentioned, I run peer-to-peer groups a lot. We put a time frame on them. It's like, it'll be this many times, we'll meet for this long. When we do meet, it's about this topic. And that way it's clear. Okay, we're going to come in and this is what we're going to talk about. And when it's over, Lord willing, you end with saying, okay, we did what we wanted to do and we addressed the problem and the stuckage, and we've moved on. And so I think that's huge. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think on my end, again, like we're not pointing the fingers at a ton of people, in my experience, but this is one of those things where the entire reason why I took that approach was because I was counseled to take that approach. And so I think there's a level of scrutinizing the counsel you're getting is important. And I think that's where probably that could have been helpful to have definitely have more peer-to-peer stuff going on than I did at that time. Because I had such a respect for the guy 10, 15, 20 years down the road from me, not fully realizing that they may be operating, or their mentality about coaching or mentoring may be a generation reversing the way things were handled and done. And so the peer-to-peer thing is gold. There's certainly something to be said about the gray heads, and I'm getting there for sure. But at the same time, it's not like brothers we're walking alongside of now are not walking in wisdom. They're not just looking to be pragmatist. They are the ones living in this cultural moment that we're in, doing ministry. And that stuff should be like filtered at a level and maybe bounced off of someone. But I certainly think had I brought that to one of my friends at the time, they probably would have said, yeah, I think you might want to look at, like the photo, right? I think you might want to think about all these different seats a little bit. Probably wouldn't have said it as clear as what that session was done, but it certainly would have cautioned against. Like I could see myself even 8, 9, 10 years ago, if someone said just this guy, I probably would have pushed back on that and said, well, multitude of counselors, right? Like you just got to, I would, maybe change that or push back on that a little bit. So the peer-to-peer is great. And I think a lot of the times present now, most of my, I don't want to say counsel, but most of strategic moves, that I make now that are followed by maybe a blessing or I don't want to, peace is the wrong word, but that seem to move the mission forward, and move me forward in large capacity come from peers that are just walking in wisdom, so for what it's worth.
Let's kind of pull this towards some suggested action items. Obviously, if the mistake was I did not have this in play, I did not have a church planting mentor and or coach, I think the broad takeaway for anyone is like, we would recommend that. I mean,
Yes.
I would recommend it now, like no matter what phase you're in, I would look to find some outside counsel. And so let me rattle off a couple things, and then Isaac, if you want to elaborate on those things or speak, add something else, don't contradict me on my own podcast, but
will do it.
So here, I would recommend I would look for someone to be a mentor given your current need. I mean, so there's some introspection here, right? Because you're going to evaluate my gaps in knowledge and experience, recognizing I can always learn more. Even if I've got a bunch of ideas, like I want someone to kind of help me process these ideas and hold those ideas up to their own experience and knowledge. And so I would look for a mentor in this phase of life and ministry, wherever you're at. And more often than not, you'll probably have to go ask someone. And it's okay. They may tell you no, because I think Isaac did a great job of emphasizing this. They may not have the bandwidth or the capacity, the availability right now to give you what you're asking for. Don't take that personally. You do want someone who does have the means to be prepared for those conversations and come at it, not rushing them or anything. So if someone says, no, I can't do it, or I'm willing to, but it can only be, go on to someone else and ask. But I would go to someone and say, hey, would you mind over the next X amount of weeks or months, could we meet this many times on the phone or in person or whatever, and talk about this? I'd love to hear your experience, your advice. I'd love to bounce things off of you. So I would go find a mentor and begin to develop that relationship. The same thing, Isaac's last point here about the peer-to-peer. If you're just starting church planting, I would try to connect, if you haven't already, connect with a couple others that are maybe a step or two ahead of you. They've just launched, or they're already on the field, or they're doing the prep work for the launch service, or some that are behind you. They're just getting ready. Maybe they're doing their fundraising, or they're just meeting with sending agencies or whatever, and just begin to learn some things together. And so that might, again, those topics could be very specific. It could be around ecclesiology. That was the first episode of this podcast. It could be around fundraising, something very practical. It could be around discipleship or outreach, but kind of learning together. What does that look like? And so when we do peer-to-peer stuff, it's a lot of, we share our experiences. We look at some case studies, some people that have gone ahead of us, and we dig into the word and look for patterns and principles from the word, and then look for takeaways. So it's a very simple structure, and I think it'd be very meaningful time. So I'd jump into a peer-to-peer group. I'd start asking around for a mentor. And if need be, if you're at a season, you feel like you need a professional coach, then I would press into that. And I think on the front end, I would have benefited from a fundraising coach. I think that's probably a good thing to explore. I don't know if it's necessary, but to explore. A church planting coach, certainly, as you're preparing for your grand opening service or launch service, or again, I'm talking if you're going that traditional church model, which is what we started with, which what Isaac started with. I didn't have that, so I can't recommend someone specific to you. But I just did a Google search earlier this afternoon to see, if you just search ministry coaches, a bunch of stuff comes up, and you'll have to, filter through that on your own, what's what, because again, it's one of those things you want, and maybe this is a topic for down the road too. Like when we went through some low points in our ministry, my wife and I went to counseling, not marriage counseling, but counseling to deal with all the mess we were going through in ministry. And the first counselor we went a few times, not a good fit. So we went to something else. And so that may be, when it comes to mentors and coaches, even, that's something to keep in mind. Just because you asked the person and jumped into it, give it a few meetings, give it a few weeks. If it's not what you thought it was going to be, or it's not as helpful, maybe it's not a good fit. It's okay, I think, to go to someone else too. And so I would just use some discretion when you're kind of filtering through, who am I going to spend my time with? Who am I letting speak into my life? But Isaac, do you want to elaborate on any of that? Add to those lists? Is that?
I have such a bad memory. I can only remember the last one you said. So,
oh my gosh. This is your
No,
last episode, and this is
I-
Isaac's last episode with us. He's not going to
yeah,
join us
yeah.
ever again.
No, I mean, I would just network referrals, or I think too that pull with the guys who are a little bit ahead of you, recognize where they're at, in the journey, but they may be a good person to bounce some things off, or at least find a person you could talk to, depending on who they're talking to. That may be a good person for you to talk to, prior to getting started. Gosh, man, yeah, I think the introspection is huge. And perhaps a practical point here is take maybe one of the those personality assessment type
Oh yeah.
would highly recommend that. The Enneagrams, all of those things can be really, really helpful.
Strength Finder is also a good one.
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to bring your own set of strengths to your ministry, obviously.
Right.
And the better you know that what those are, the better you can hire to your weaknesses.
Yeah.
Early on, because again, that was not something, and maybe we could talk about that at some future episode where, I mean, church planning, you're wearing a lot of different hats anyways. But man, if you're why wear any more hats than you need to wear, if you don't have to. So
that's right.
And if you don't not doing the strength finder, not doing the personality assessment, not doing the Enneagram, essentially you're saying I have no idea or interest to know what hat I already could wear well. So don't do that.
And to that point, like I had a coach once, and they had, like, before we met our first time, they actually had me take a bunch of those types of tests, and then some stuff that they had developed themselves. So there is value in it, because you do kind of see, like, if you have a strength, that's not where, that's where you need to press in yourself. So then where do we make up how do we make up the weakness? So that's, it is helpful. I totally agree with what you're saying. Unless you've got something else, bro, I think we can bring this conversation to a conclusion. I do want to say I am not again, I've mentioned I'm doing some mentoring coaching just in our network here. By no means a professional, but would love and be willing to connect with anyone if just a conversation, if you're just looking for advice and someone to kind of, bounce some things off of or get some specific input. I would love to connect with you. You can find me. I have a Linktree page. It's linktr.ee/Logan Wolf. My wife in the last episode offered that to any of your, missionary wives, pastors' wives. In fact, she suggested connect with her on Instagram. That's at GrayGray88, GRAY88. And then Isaac, you've pointed people to your church's website to connect with you. Do you want to give that again? Is that still the best way?
Just inlandhillsoc.com. There's a contact form there. I mean, if you want to kick out my cell phone, that's always welcome call. So I got a lot of sticks in the fire, but anything like business related, discipleship related, I'm down to talk about it. I love both those things passionately. I'm really passionate about both of those things. So would love to be an ear and less of a mouthpiece, maybe. But
I'm about to say, I think, and that's just us, just so the audience knows, that's just us putting into practice what we wish we had. Someone being willing to just be that voice and walk with you. So if that is helpful, by all means, please do reach out to us, and then we would love to connect with you. If this has been helpful, we certainly hope it has. I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. And leave us a review or a rating. We've got a number of ratings, not a ton, a couple of reviews. I've received some emails and some texts from different people. So I'm glad that people are listening and finding some of this encouraging and thought-provoking. I would also ask you to just share it. If you know a church planter, someone who's with a church planting organization, a sending agency of some sort, please pass this along or even to your own team or something of that nature, and let it be a source for conversation, discussion, as you're on the field or preparing to go to the field. Again, my name is Logan Wolf. I'm joined by Isaac Morin here. And this has been Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series.